This video is brought to you by Moft.
Last week I posted a video saying that iPhone 14 Plus is very likely to be your next iPhone upgrade simply because it's a big display iPhone 13/14, to which many of you said, what are you talking about? The 13 Pro Max is clearly the better phone. Spec to spec, all that stuff. And you know what? I sat down, read those comments, and thought to myself, I should probably do a comparison between the two because I have extensive experience with the 13 Pro Max. I was very happy with it before I upgraded to the 14 Max or the 14 Pro Max, which is purely because this is my job, being a tech reviewer. So in this video, we're going to compare the two spec to spec, but also just experience to experience because it's not all that simple, but there is sort of a clear-cut path to a given phone depending on who you are and what you need. So let's dive deeper into this. And there is truly no better place to start than talking about display. Both of these phones have 6.7-inch Super Retina OLED panels, so you get the same color, the same contrast, pure blacks, really white whites. You get the same resolution as well. I'm pretty sure it's identical. It should be. I mean, these displays look identical, same notch, same cutout, same size, all of that. Where you run into differences is with the refresh rate and the brightness here. The 14 Plus maxes out at 800 nits, which is still really great. That was something I love with the 12 Pro. I really can't enjoy a display if it doesn't consistently output that. That's just me because I like to sear my eyes with blue light, whereas the iPhone 13 Pro Max can max out at 1000. I'm not gonna demo this here just for the sake of these phones looking good on camera, but I like that even more, but that's just me. I am a brightness freak. So, I'm not gonna say that you need 1000 nits, but it definitely will benefit you outside. It's gonna be a little more visible in bright spaces. And if you like brightness, of course, that's a reason to want this phone. But other than that, the brightness is still pretty decent on the 14 Plus. 800 nits is nothing to scoff at, and it's gonna look great in whatever kind of content or with whatever kind of content you're consuming on a regular basis. Oh, and while we're on the topic of display, quick shout out to my wallpaper pack Skyline. I took these in New York. I think they look pretty clean, and if you do too, check out my link listed in the video description. Something you might notice a little more though is the refresh rate, and not even. A lot of people can't tell, a lot of people don't care, but I can tell scrolling on a 120 hertz display versus a 60 hertz display does make a difference to me. It just looks more true to life or just more fluid if you are using a 13 Pro Max with a ProMotion or 120 hertz display that is double the refresh rate of that of the 14 Plus and the iPhone 13 and any other iPhone with a 60 hertz display. So I would honestly focus more on that than the display brightness because other than that, the ProMotion aspect of the 13 Pro Max is what really differentiates this display from that which is on the 14 Plus. So again, if you care, if you notice, opt for the 13 Pro Max. And if you don't, the 14 Plus is going to serve you really, really well. And this topic also gets me into our next aspect that we're going to compare, and that is battery life. You would think that a Pro model would do better. Not the case here. These phones both respectively have a very similar milliamp hour number. I think the 14 Plus has a slightly smaller battery, like 3523 compared to like 3550 or something like that. But let's keep in mind that both of these phones have the same SoC or chip on the inside. An A15 Bionic with a 5-core GPU, 6 gigs of RAM, similar storage, all of that. And you might be thinking, Noah, why are we talking about processor specs or performance in the battery comparison portion of this video? Well, it's important to note these similarities or the identical chips on the inside here because A, performance is technically the same, which is why we're not gonna have a performance portion or comparison portion in this video. But even more importantly, technically, if you're thinking about these phones like cars, they got the same engine. They are technically consuming gas at the same rate, or in this case, these phones are sipping power at the same rate, except they're not because the 13 Pro Max has a more power-hungry display, technically. If you put it into low power mode, it goes to 60 hertz. Maybe you can disable ProMotion, so you have the ability to sort of underclock the display in the 13 Pro Max to match that of the 14 Plus. With the 14 Plus, it is not as bright and not as high refresh rate-y. God, that's not even a word. It doesn't output the same refresh rate. It's halved and you can't do anything about that. So you are going to be sipping power even more so, because the display is another thing that eats up power alongside the processor. So the display is what does it, and I'm sure that's why we're seeing some of the numbers we're seeing in battery performance tests between even the 14 Pro Max and this phone. This is why this phone performs so well. So if you want the battery champion, you're gonna wanna go with the iPhone 14 Plus, especially because it's harder to get the 13 Pro Max new. Sure, you can maybe do it. I know some carriers have some new ones, but after a while, these are gonna be gone and you're gonna have to buy a used one. And whether you buy one soon or a year from now, the batteries in these are gonna be more degraded. So not only do you get better performance with the 14 Plus, you get a brand new battery with it too, which will enhance that even more. So if you care about pro features in the display, obviously again, think about the 13 Pro Max, it's still gonna get you through the day and then some. But if you want extra juice and you don't care about a high refresh rate display or a brighter display for that matter, the 14 Plus really seems to be king now in terms of iPhone battery life. Next up though, let's talk about something a little more superficial, and that is design. It is pretty important, I'm not gonna lie. Not the most important aspect, but it definitely plays a role in your decision making here. These phones offer different materials and different feels in the hand, and different colors for that matter. Let's start off first with the iPhone 13 Pro Max here. I have a graphite one here. It also comes in silver, gold, and Sierra blue. Ugh. And some pine green, which is okay as well. I like silver and graphite the best. I think they're the most neutral. I mean, I'm a little biased because my clothes literally match these phones, but I digress. You get frosted glass on here as well. This was a precedent set with the iPhone 11 Pro. I like it. It feels premium, but there's something about the glossy glass with the 14 Plus that I love. It reminds me of my iPhone XS Max, which I miss a lot for whatever reason, probably for nostalgia reasons, but I digress. You also get stainless steel on the sides here with the Pro model as well. This is another precedent set with the XS Max, or the iPhone X, excuse me. But this does make the overall chassis heavier. 37 grams heavier than the 14 Plus, and although that doesn't seem like a lot, this phone feels a lot heavier in the hand compared to this, which of course is glossy glass once again, but aluminum sides, which don't feel as nice or as bougie, but I think they feel really, really premium. You also get nicer pastel-y colors with the iPhone 14 series, but again, it's really up to you. I really would sort of compare these two more so on the material, which then dictates the feel in hand. So if you want a lighter phone, the iPhone 14 Plus is gonna be the way to go. If you don't care and you want the stainless steel because it makes a difference to you, then the 13 Pro Max is gonna be your phone. Regardless of what you go with though, you're gonna wanna get a case to protect your investment, which brings us to today's video sponsor, Moft, and their Snap Series case and their Snap Power Set. The combination of the case, the battery, and the wallet offer a really modular system to suit your lifestyle needs. For example, if you are done using the battery, you can just detach it like so, and just attach the wallet back on here and carry on, which offers a lighter setup. Again though, if you need more power, you can just put the battery back on. It's made out of really nice vegan leather as well, very premium design here, and it attaches very nicely with the enhanced MagSafe magnets on this case too. It also has a really great charging cable here, which I need to untangle. And here we go, the cable attaches magnetically as well, which is really nice, just like MagSafe, which is convenient so you don't like yank the cord and your phone off the table or whatever if you're trying to charge your battery and iPhone at the same time. And if you're doing that here, it's really nice as well because the port is on the side, so it's not on the bottom and getting in the way, so it's right on the side if you are propped up vertically and scrolling through TikTok or Safari or whatever you're doing, so you can charge without interruption and of course remove the cable very conveniently with the magnetic tip here. Great system. I recommend this for any iPhone that you got. I'll leave a link in the video description if you're interested. So we've gone over display, battery life, and design, and performance again is the same because you have the same chips in here, verbatim, spec to spec, GPU core to GPU core. The last thing we're gonna compare is camera performance. And I have my notes here on my 14 Pro Max with a Moft case. I mean, we already went over this case, but shout out to them again. It's actually a really useful setup here. But I have my notes out because there's just so many things we're gonna talk about here. So sit tight, it's going to get detailed. So to state the obvious here, we got 2 cameras with the 14 Plus, 3 cameras with the 13 Pro Max. Something important to note is that both of these phones have a 1x and a 0.5x camera respectively. These are the most used cameras, the wide and the ultra wide, if you will. And that's why they're present on the 14 Plus, because this is what most people go to when they want to just do point and shoot photography. However, you get a telephoto lens with the third sensor on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And by the way, all of these are 12 megapixel, which makes them super comparable. There's no 48 megapixel sensor like we have on the 14 Pro or Pro Max. I digress. But the 3x telephoto offers 3x optical zoom, which I find useful in some cases. I like taking artistic shots. I like taking pictures of things far away. So the fact that I can just engage my camera, get 3x going, and just zoom in optically, knowing I'm not losing any quality, digitally cropping in, that's great. If you need it, you know you do, and if you don't, then you don't. And again, once again, the 0.5 and the 1x are enough for most people here. However, another commonality that we're gonna dive into here is the fact that the 1x camera, which I think is the most important on both of these, are spec to spec, I think, identical. They have the same sensor and the same lens, so f1.5, but also 1.9 size pixels, which was a big deal with the 13 Pro Max, and they also made a big deal about this with the 14 Plus. It's not necessarily a new feature, it just was sort of ported over or brought over from the 13 Pro Max to the 14 Plus, which is, I think, a pretty big deal because we saw increased bokeh compared to the 12 Pro Max and the 12 Pro from last year or the previous year when this was a new phone. So we got a really great 1x camera, which is your primary camera anyway. So you get all of the delicious bokeh and low light or raw low light capability with the 13 Pro Max. Now on the 14 Plus. And don't conflate RAW with actual ProRAW, which we'll talk about. I mean RAW like just brought to you by the hardware, because there are some software differences that we need to go over. Before I do that, though, I want to acknowledge the software commonalities. Both of these have HDR4 and Deep Fusion and your typical Apple processing for the most part. Where things get different is with the 14 series, specifically the 14 Plus in this case, with something called the Photonic Engine. This is a new way Apple deals with low light photography. I don't know exactly how it works. It's some kind of computational magic, which apparently increases low light performance up to 2.5x in some cases. And I've actually seen this. This is really weird. On the back here, the ultra wide cameras are different. They have the same sensor size, but you have a different lens here, f2.4 with the 14 Plus and f1.8 with the iPhone 13 Pro Max here. You'd think that the iPhone 13 Pro Max, since it lets in more light, would perform better, and I think it might. But at the same time, I've been looking at some 14 Plus images and also 14 images, and they look pretty identical, maybe even better. So even though the ultra wide on the 14 Plus is an f2.4 aperture, the processing might make up for it. I don't know though, because the ultra wide on the 13 Pro Max has another trick up its sleeve, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here or in a few seconds. I don't know how time works when I'm doing a live video. But anyway, I digress. The Photonic Engine is kind of a big deal. It does make for better low light photos, and when paired with even the 1x camera, which is identical to that of the 13 Pro Max, you might even see better performance out of that as well, so keep that in mind. The 13 Pro Max though does slap back with a few unique features. First and foremost here, the ultra wide camera has a wider aperture, which may or may not make low light better, but more importantly, I think it accommodates macro photography, which is a big deal. You can take these really cool images up close of your eyeball, of nature, of things in your house, whatever you want. This is something unique to the iPhone in photo and in video. Here, you cannot do the same with the 14 Plus. So no macro versus macro photography and video is super cool. So if this is important to you, definitely opt for the 13 Pro Max. Another feature that you get with the 13 Pro Max or 13 Pro is night photography or night portrait mode, excuse me. I don't really use portrait mode, so it's really not a big deal to me, but if you do and you like taking them at night, then great. I don't think this is like a feature that you should buy this phone for though, but what you should buy the 13 Pro Max for, besides macro photography and the telephoto, is ProRAW. ProRAW allows you to take higher quality images or images with more data to work with in post. So if you are really particular about editing your photos in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever app you use, you can take, again, these higher fidelity, more manipulatable images compared to the HEICs or the compressed images you can only take on the 14 and 14 Plus respectively. So you have more of an ability to edit your photos if you shoot in RAW at the same 12 megapixel quality or size compared to the 14 Plus. So if you're more of a photographer, again, it makes sense to go for the 13 Pro Max over this. even though we do see some low light increased capability here, I think with the 14 Plus. Again, your mileage may vary, and you let me know from the examples that you see in this video. Oh, and while we're talking about the back-facing camera, it's important to note that you can get up to 4K in cinematic mode with the 14 Plus, and up to HD or only HD with the 13 Pro Max, which is dumb because these phones have the same chip. This is literally just an example of Apple going, hey, you know, actually we think that this phone should have this feature because it has a number higher and this phone shouldn't. It's dumb, but you know what? If you want cinematic mode in a higher quality or in more resolution, go for the 14 Plus. I guess it's your only option. I don't think it's a reason to buy the 14 Plus over the 13 Pro Max, but again, I don't know if some of you are fanatic about cinematic mode. I'm not, because it takes 17 years to export and airdrop to my Mac to edit, so I'm really not into it. But if you are, again, keep this in mind. It's just sort of a software difference arbitrarily decided by Apple. Last up though, we gotta talk about front-facing camera performance because it's wildly different here. For the first time in the history of iPhone, we have a front-facing camera with the 14 series, specifically the 14 Plus in this case, that has autofocus. It's a big deal. You can focus on things closer to your face. You can hold your hand up and have it focus. You can take selfies closer to your face. Like, I mean, it sounds dumb, but like you literally cannot do that with the 13 Pro Max. It has a fixed focus front-facing camera, so you're very limited there with what you can do. The front-facing camera on the 14 Plus also lets in more light, which gives you better looking images. I think marginally so. I'm not going to say definitively better, but technically better, and I think I've noticed it a bit. So you be the judge as well. I don't want to judge photos because sometimes I'm wrong. So again, you let me know what you think here. So the front-facing camera on here is much better. f1.9 autofocus versus f2.2 fixed focus. So it's a big upgrade. So if you're a big selfie taker and all of that, then the 14 Plus is going to be the phone you're gonna wanna get. And that brings us to the end here. Let me reference my notes because I'm just in camera land still. But yeah, let's sum things up here. The iPhone 14 Plus is technically the more boring phone with a less ambitious display, but because you have less brightness and refresh rate here, that preserves or gives you amazing battery life, the best battery life on an iPhone. Also with the same performance, the same chip on the inside as the 13 Pro Max here. You also get a lighter body and design with glossy glass, which you may prefer, which I actually kind of prefer in some ways here. So lighter body, same power, less ambitious display, also a less ambitious camera setup, but I would say equally high quality in most cases, especially with the 1x camera and the photonic engine. Whereas with the 13 Pro Max here, you get a more ambitious display. It's brighter, it's higher refresh rate, but that does sacrifice a bit of battery life here. You also get a telephoto camera, which is nice. You do get some software benefits, ProRAW, which is a great thing, macro photography, which is actually both software and hardware. If you like that, then go for this. But you also get a heavier design and fewer fun colors if you care, but I honestly think the heavier design is more of something that you might want to not consider or consider depending on your style or what you want here. You really cannot go wrong with both, but again, I hope that this video sort of makes you realize that this comparison is a lot more nuanced. The 13 Pro Max is definitely not for everyone, nor is the 14 Plus. So choose carefully, take my words with a grain of salt. I'm not gonna choose for you. Just choose based on what you need, and that's all I have to say here. Check out my links to Moft and my wallpaper pack again. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one. Hello. How are you? Wow, you're handsome.